and welcome to Tales from the Midpack. I'm your host, Rebecca Hunt. I'll be bringing you stories from everyday runners, experts, and some race recaps. Today we have someone we are lucky to have returned to us in Adelaide this year, Tash Sekulic. Welcome, Tash.
Thank you.
I first met you on my first Summit to Sea run at the end of last year on a beautiful summer's day. And I had no idea at that point what a seasoned ultra runner you were. And this year you had success with your second go at a 200 miler and did it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But before we find out all about that amazing experience, always get listeners to get to know you a little bit more. So when you're not running, what do you get up to?
Oh, I got my Strava stats for 2020 today, and apparently I was running for 500 hours of 2020. So that's
not much else.
Quite a large chunk for this year.
Yeah.
When I'm not running, though, I'm a lawyer. I work for the government, so specialise in tax and charity law. So that does take up a large number of my hours. I love playing music. I play guitar and drums, and I love drinking craft beer.
Yeah. Looks like you hit the bike a bit as well. You want to do it more.
That's sitting in the corner there trying to inspire me. Look, when the world is a fairly normal place and there's somewhere to ride to, like the commute, I tend to do a lot better with the bike riding, but I have to admit that's forced cross training rather than a labour of love.
Okay. How long have you been running and what got you into it?
I've been running ultras for around about 8 years, I think. But I've been running probably maybe 10 years. So I think I ran my first half marathon shortly after my a pretty significant breakup, and had always been the unfit one in that partnership and told that, I couldn't do these things. So I think I just did it as an act of rebellion to show that I could do these things. And
then discovered you enjoyed them.
Yeah, so I did maybe a handful of half marathons, and then moved up to the marathon distance. But I only did one marathon before I signed up pretty quickly signed up to my first 100K 3 weeks after my first marathon.
Wow.
Got pretty injured because that's not really the way to progress. I ended up with a pretty significant stress fracture, and I was told not to run for 6 weeks, and I didn't run for 4 weeks, and then made it 10 times worse and ended up not running for about 6 months. So, got all those first-time injuries out of the way in that first year of trying to make my debut into ultra running. But since then, I think I learned some pretty hard lessons pretty quickly.
Yeah. And
then it's been a pretty natural progression. It's what it's felt like, just stepping up the distance, stepping up the elevation, and making it more challenging with every run.
Yeah, you certainly did that this year. The original 200 miler you were going to run got COVID cancelled. That's a new noun that I've made up. So essentially your first successful 200 miler was also a fat ass run, essentially.
Yeah.
And I had someone ask me that the other day. So I think that term started in the US. I'm not 100% sure, but it's like no frills, social run. You're doing it all under your own steam rather than being in an organised event, essentially, which is a hell of a way to do a 200 miler. But you had a deep motivation for continuing despite the event being cancelled because you were honouring your friend Amy Cook and doing a big fundraiser for her. Last I saw, you'd raised $6,012 for Lifeline, which is fantastic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about Amy and her legacy that you were inspired by?
Try to not get too emotional here. So, Amy has been, as I mentioned earlier, I love playing music outside of running, and Amy was a wicked drummer and part of a bit of a posse that we had of female drummers who, were bashing our drums as hard as we could, and showing that women can play an instrument that's, I guess, seen a little bit as a male instrument. So I stopped playing, so I can't put myself in the same category as Amy. Amy kept kicking ass and got better and better and played in some pretty awesome bands. It was, so I'd signed up to run the 200 miler, and it was cancelled, and I got an email from Sean saying that it was cancelled, but he'd still, and I originally wasn't running for charity. I was running because I was in quarantine, and when I came back to South Australia and needed something, to get me through that 2 weeks of quarantine, and signed up while I was on my treadmill. So the race was cancelled, and I was quite relieved. I was like, oh, good, because I didn't really want to train anymore. And got home. So I was at Yorke's Peninsula, which, funny enough, is where Amy's from originally, and got back home and had a phone call from our joint best friend Tanya, letting me know that Amy had passed away really unexpectedly. And I think it took me maybe 24 hours to realise that I was going to do the run for Amy.
Yeah. Is the donation page still active?
The donation page is just closed.
Oh, it's just closed.
Yeah, Sean.
But it was Lifeline. That you were...
So Amy had struggled with some demons, but one of the things that I wanted to be really clear on was that Amy did use Lifeline. It was a service that I know that she'd relied upon in the past, but I didn't want her death to be her legacy. No. Amy was an activist in every sense of that word. We did a joint fundraiser a few years ago when I did my first big run, which was across the Simpson Desert, the Big Red Run, which I know a lot of Adelaide people have done. Yeah. And Amy got on board with that because she just loved a cause. Yeah. And we raised about $6,000 for diabetes, type 1 diabetes then. And I could never have done that without Amy. We put on fundraiser shows. We mixed music and running, and it was just an art. It was epic. And so I think I wanted to honour Amy's legacy, which is activism. If you see a problem, do something about it. Don't think, why isn't someone doing something about that? Like, you're someone.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be the someone.
Yeah. And then with COVID at the moment, I think a lot of people are feeling pretty down. Some people's lives have been affected far more than others, but that doesn't mean what you're feeling is any less than what, maybe you didn't lose your job or get sick or lose your grandma or your mother, but that doesn't mean what you're feeling is any less significant. If you're feeling alone or isolated or sad or just not quite yourself, that is just as real and just as important. And charities need our money right now because they're providing that service to people.
Definitely.
Hence Lifeline.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So you signed up on a treadmill during COVID. So what was your training like? And then you thought the event wasn't happening for a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, I really took the pedal off that weekend. I think... So I know for some people 2020 has been a pretty hard year for training, especially because I came from Melbourne and we had that 1 hour a day where you're allowed to exercise. For some people, their training really backed off. But for me, gyms were closed. Like CrossFit's another huge part of my life. I couldn't go to CrossFit. My family were in Adelaide. I was stuck in Melbourne. So I had my ISO birthday, as everyone's had this year, and I ran a marathon around the block because what else was I going to do? So I actually had more miles this year than I have in a long time, and I think I had a much better base than I have had in a really long time because I wasn't doing that taper race recover cycle. I was just building, but it was all done on flat ground because I wasn't living close to the trails. They weren't within my radius, and even when I moved to Adelaide, like, I live close to the beach. It's lovely, but it's flat. So I was getting in the hours, but not so much the elevation. Yeah. What
was it overall?
I can't remember. If I tell you, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it was more than what we thought it was going to be. I was really interested in the data that everyone had. My watch broke halfway through, which was kind of fun. You just run for feel. But I was really interested in the data that everybody else had, and it was a lot more elevation than I think any of us had expected. Okay.
Because, Lavender Trail is not a well-run trail yet, really.
No, and there's a lot of dirt road, a lot of country road that's very flat. Like, it is a very runnable course, but there are some gnarly sections and some hilly sections. And I don't know, I just underestimate Adelaide when it comes to hills. I always think, it's flat. But no, the parts of that didn't really feel that flat.
Little pimples compared to what other states have sometimes. But how did you feel at the start line, looking down the barrel of 200 miles? I think a lot of us can't even just fathom being at the start of something like that, when you know you're out here for 4 days. Like, that's the likely result of this. So how does that feel like on that start line?
I don't think I ever let myself think of it that way. Like at the start line, I was just running to Monado, which is about 20k away. And that was my first, the first point where someone was going to meet me with food and water. My friend Mignon was going to be there. So all I had in my head was I was running to meet Mignon, half marathon away. And then when I got there, there was a big gap between so I had about 7 hours before I'd see her again. Yeah. So that was probably the biggest hurdle, going, I've got 7 hours of running alone. But that part of the course was a lot more runnable than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. So I think I was just so grateful to be out of the house, out of the COVID bubble. My friends in Melbourne were still restricted to their 5 kilometre radius. And I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'm running 200 miles and they're not allowed to run more than 5k past their house right now. So anytime that thought did come into my mind about the distance, I was just filled with gratitude for the fact that I was able to do that.
Even when it was hailing on you?
It was great. It was, I don't know, I was deliriously happy that first 100 miles. But when I got to that 100 miles point and I had taken a wrong turn, I think that was probably my only downer, but it was a pretty bad downer when I realised I'd run 100 miles and I had 100 miles to go.
I was going to ask you that, what was it like finishing 100 miles knowing you now have to do that again?
So I sat in the back of my car, so I took a wrong turn and I couldn't quite figure out how I was supposed to get back on track.
That's when you went into Truro?
Yeah, so I went into this township rather than following the trail on the outskirts, and I just had a bit of a breakdown. I thought, what a stupid idea. And I kept thinking of Amy, and I kept thinking of her family and her friends and everyone who'd got behind the cause. And I thought, what a dumb idea to try and run 200 miles to honour someone I love. Like, I'm destined to fail, and what kind of a memory is that? So I sulked, and then I drive a very small car, a tiny pink sparkly Nissan Micra, and I got into the back seat and I crawled up and I just stayed there for maybe, 15 minutes. And I was just quiet, and my partner was sitting in the front seat and he didn't say a word. He just let me be there quiet. And then I said, look, I've reassessed and I'm just going to, I thought I was going to do 60 Ks before I had another rest. And that was quite a hilly section. And I said, look, I've reassessed and 60 Ks is too much for my head to process. So I'm just running 13K, and then I'm going to run another 13K and then another 13K. And then I think I got to about 40K and then I needed a rest. But that was okay. Like, it was fine to re-strategize. But I think that was a lesson I learned. Don't think too big. Don't think too far ahead. Bite-sized chunks, and those bite-sized chunks might need to become nibbles at some point, and that's okay. But you've just got to be flexible with your strategy and be kind to your mind, because your mind is the one that will wander.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what was your training like? Do you do any mental training at all? That's a pretty bit of a brand new field that's kind of coming out, where they're like getting people to do logical thinking puzzles and then getting them to exercise, and there's like statistically significant improvement, which I find fascinating. So is that something you do deliberately, or?
I'm the product of some pretty badass, hard-minded Europeans, and I tend to, I don't know, I think that I don't do mental training because I think that I'm that's probably the only reason I'm any good at this sport is I'm not a natural athlete. Like I failed one subject at school, and that was PE. Yeah. I don't have a natural athletic bone in my body, but I'm mentally very resilient and stubborn. And so that's the only thing that gets me through. So that's kind of the natural bit that I don't have to work on too much. It's the physical stuff that I really need to devote every minute to get through these things.
Yeah. I mentioned the wind and rain. It was really quite a start. I mean, that was all the first day, all the first night, and then quite a lot of the second day as well. What that brings up, though, is wet feet. So I had my first experience of wet feet damage a couple of months ago, and I can't even imagine what that was like. How do you manage wet feet?
Yeah. So it's been like 2 months, I think, just over, and I'm still, my feet are still recovering. Like they were pretty badly damaged, and like I've done a lot of desert runs, and the first desert run I did, I lost every toenail, and like there wasn't a bit of my feet that wasn't blistered. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, that'll never happen again now. Once it happens once, it'll never happen again." And it's kind of been true for deserts, not for wet. So it was a whole different, my feet had never experienced that. And it was really interesting because a lot of the course it's dirt roads and farmland. So every time you're going through farmland, you're walking through like knee-high grass. So
it's not just the rain then. It's the dew.
It's the dew.
Wow.
And it's so even when it stopped raining, we still had that dew. And the farmland, it's very uneven. So it's puddles. So you're getting the wet from above and below. So in the beginning, I was trying to change my socks regularly, but then it just seemed like what was the point, because they're just wet 10 minutes in. So it was a little bit of a morale booster when it got really cold on some of the nights to have dry socks for 10 minutes. But in the end, I just kind of gave up. And I think like I paper taped my feet at the beginning, but that, washed away pretty quickly. I didn't leave the hot spots though. That was one thing. Like when I got hot spots, I stopped and fixed them. So, I had like...
How did you fix? Yeah.
I know it's very controversial, but I use Compeed, which I know a lot of people don't like. Okay. But I just stuck... so I used the Compeed pads on my feet. I did have one instance...
Are they like blister pads?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what someone put on me. I didn't know there was any controversy.
Yeah, the problem is trying to get them off afterwards. So if you've had a bad blister and you've popped it and, and then you put the Compeed pad on top, then that sensitive skin is now stuck to the Compeed pad. And so I actually had to wait for them to just kind of fall off at the end. But look, it got me through the race. There was an instance though where I thought the Compeed pad had moved, and they're a couple of centimetres. They're pretty big. But it was actually a new blister that had imitated the shape of the Compeed pad. So that's like, the blisters were huge and they were everywhere. But yeah, I don't know, like after a while, your feet just kind of go numb and you don't really realise how bad they are till the end. Like I always have shoes that are a size too big for me, or a size and a half too big for me, that I change into halfway. Yeah. So I didn't lose any toenails, so that was fine. Yeah, I just waited till they went numb and then kind of sucked it up and kept going. But the sun did come out towards the end, so...
Oh my goodness. So there's no magical cure then, unfortunately.
Not that I've found. No.
You obviously went through a lot of socks, by the sounds of it though. What's your go-to socks?
I had a whole selection for this race for all the different conditions. I do like the Stygian socks. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But they were good in the wet weather because everything was just getting soaked through, and they're just a really thin, light sock, so it didn't seem like they were rubbing too much. Yeah. I did have the Injinjis, but they're quite thick, so that once they got wet and you're just going through the night, they seemed to... They were good, but, you were ready for a change. Okay. I think those were the two that I relied on the most for this race. Yeah.
You had a few little surprise adventures while you're out there, like getting zapped with an electric fence. So tell us about some of the unexpected little surprises out there?
Oh, the electric fence was the worst. I still haven't quite gotten over that. And I know, like I'd said before, that, I'm a hard ass and I think I've got the mental training down pat, but sometimes I'm not. And the electric fence, I was a real baby about that, I have to admit, and I've still been carrying on about it to anyone who will listen. That was around the 100-kilometre mark. It was the first night, so we'd been running, through the rain all day into the night, and I was running with Sarah, who was the first female to finish and is an absolutely amazing human being. I touched the electric fence. Most of the fences had like piping on them so you sort of weren't even thinking about it. You were just crossing thought that you were protected. But no, not this one. The piping had moved, and the bolt that went through my body, it was, I screamed so loudly. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry to Sarah. She said, what else were you going to do? Which, was good. But we were wondering why the farmers didn't come out. That would have, because it was a pretty loud scream. But yeah, it was a pretty cold night. So that was one way to get warm. If you haven't been shot by an electric fence before, it's quite a warming, invigorating experience. So to wake you up and get the blood flowing. In terms of other things, I think that the race itself wasn't too bad, but I did some training runs out on that course and had some interesting encounters. So I was a little bit more prepared come race day. So there's one section of the course just out of Springton where there's a whole bunch of cows that seem very, very angry at human beings, and and the course actually goes through where they're hanging out. So I ended up perched on a fence in the neighbouring paddock for about half an hour when I did a training one. They probably weren't going to do anything, but I don't know. There was a lot of them there, and they were staring at me like they knew I was bottom of the food chain.
It must be how they're drawn in picture books, like little kid storybooks. But then when you actually go out and see a real cow, oh my God, they're like as big as a horse. Like they're massive. You don't realise until you're out there.
I know.
Us suburbanites. Like.
And we beat them into kindness, I think, but when you see these weren't wild cows, but when you do see wild cows out in the desert, they're not timid. They don't have those beautiful doe eyes that we think they have. So Sarah and I went through that paddock, and I was pretty happy that the two of us were going through that paddock together, because I did remember those cows, but they weren't too bad. I think
you said no snakes.
No snakes. No, I did expect to see a snake or two. It'll be interesting, what the course delivers in future years, because there's a lot of really high grass. So
waist high at one point.
Yeah. So you either get the wet, like if it's going to be held in July, which it's meant to be, I think, in winter, you're going to either have the wet, which is, joyful blisters, or you're going to have snakes. Yeah. So I'll take the blister.
Yeah, if you had to choose. You talked about with Truro you had quite a big slump there, but then it seemed like it's surprising the things that pull you out of slumps. So near the end it was seeing two lizards getting it on. So the question there is how do you stay positive with such a distance? And obviously you don't 100% of the time, but that's just one funny thing where it just pulled you out a little bit, gave you a laugh. But what were some of the other things that really helped you get out of any down points?
There are some great bakeries in that region.
Ooh.
And actually I had some wonderful people turn up unexpectedly with bakery treats. So Courtney, I've never met Courtney before. Somebody contacted me on Facebook. She was meant to do the run and couldn't do it. And she turned up, I think it was in Udunda, with a donut. Oh, no, sorry, it wasn't a donut. She met with a donut later. It was a finger bun. And I didn't know that I needed a finger bun until someone turned up in the middle of nowhere with a finger bun. It was the most amazing thing. I felt so happy after that. Yeah. But churro happened to be a pasty. A friend brought me Tanya and Sam brought me a pasty. And after, I think it was the third night, because I didn't plan a sleep stop for the third night. So I had a little bit of sleep in night one, a little bit of sleep night two, but no sleep night three. I just wanted to plough through. And that was really, really difficult. But about 5 a.m, my friends turned up with a pasty and a black coffee, and that was seriously the best pasty I've ever eaten in my life. That was great, yeah. And I think just because it was a fat ass run, I'm not somebody who normally runs with a crew. I feel that's a lot of pressure, and I'm not a fast runner, so I feel that pressure of keeping to time frames really overbearing.
Or they're sitting there waiting for you.
That's right. Yeah, I really don't enjoy that feeling. So I don't. Running with a crew is new to me, but I had to have a crew given this wasn't an actual race, just because of the water logistics alone. There's no water out there, but seeing their faces was so amazing, and I think it's a reminder that you get energy from far more sources than sleep and food. Like a joke on the trail, a smile, a hug, like those things are so energizing and uplifting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Day 3, though, you started to feel really good. Now, you talk about sleep, so you got 2 hours of solid sleep and a fresh bra, so that was another pick you up. But you only got 2.5 hours of decent sleep the entire 4 days. So you were on the go for 82 hours and 45 minutes, if I've got the time right. And that just seems unfathomable. Like you said, you got energy from other places, but 2.5 hours of proper sleep. Tell us about sleep and sleep deprivation and what it's like.
I had a few lie downs, but the sleep. So I did get off my feet for a couple of hours the first night. I didn't sleep much, but the weather was so wild that I've learned from experience that there's benefit to just being horizontal for a little while in those big events. But I attempted Tor Des Geants, a 330 kilometre race in Italy a couple of years ago now, and I timed out. I DNF'd around 200k, and if I'd had half hour up my sleeve, like I knew that checkpoint was going to be the really difficult one to make. Had I had half hour up my sleeve, I would have been fine, because if I'd made that checkpoint, the cutoffs are really generous from that point onwards.
Right. Okay.
Where I went wrong with that was that I got a lot of my advice from elite runners rather than mid to backpackers.
And so they run very different races.
Really different.
Yeah.
So a lot of people told me their advice on sleep strategy, and that would have worked for them, but I wasted time trying to force sleep when I wasn't feeling it, and that was time that I could have had in that later part of the race to make that cutoff. So I knew I was going to test myself with sleep, but if I wasn't feeling it, I was just going to keep moving. And I think I had a bit more courage I think I was very scared about going without sleep that first time round, where this time I realised you get your energy from far more sources than sleep and food. It's okay. You're not going to go mad. You're not going to, it's okay.
Did you hear about people getting delusions, like hallucinations, I mean?
Yeah, I used to be very terrified of going without sleep because I have bipolar, and I was told very early in my diagnosis that you should never go without, 6 hours is the minimum sleep you should have a night. That could trigger hypomania. And I was very scared about trying 100 milers or anything where I would go without sleep. It's been absolutely fine.
Okay.
And I didn't even get a single hallucination on that 200 miler.
Is that disappointing?
Very disappointing.
Some of them sound just so funny.
So disappointing. I was really looking forward to it, but I guess that like my advice though with sleep is to not be afraid of going without sleep. Don't be silly, like don't try and push on. I think one of the interesting things about this race compared to some of the other 200 milers going around is you're not going to be able to sleep on the side of the trail because it's too wet.
Yeah.
So you actually do need to factor in those sleep stops. But
particularly a lot of it's on roads as well.
Yeah. And they were just like clay, because of the rain. I was begging Sorrel, my pacer, on the third night to let me sleep in the clay for just a little bit, and she wouldn't let me because she said it was too dangerous. So you do have to factor in rest stops, but I think you probably just learn from trial and error. But
what your body needs.
But don't be scared of going without sleep too. It's okay.
It's okay. The last half hour you got was the next night when Sorrel wrapped you up like a Euros. I think everybody saw that picture, your little silver Euros on the park bench. You said you woke up fresh as a daisy and yelled that was the best sleep ever. And Sorrel, pacing you, laughed because it had been 30 minutes. So you're saying the micro sleeps, like they're really surprisingly rejuvenating. How long do the effects of those sleeps last though? How long before you're a bit again?
That was my last sleep for the race. So that one got me through, and I finished. So that was about 7 a.m. on the fourth day, and I finished at 5 p.m. So that got me through. That was, but I think So I'm sitting here in the previous question saying, "Oh no, we don't need a lot of sleep. Don't be afraid of sleep deprivation." But that third night was pretty tough. Like I did end up breaking into a derelict farm, and sleeping on a little piece of cast iron for about maybe 2 minutes before I freaked out that there were rats and mice in there. And it wasn't really, it made us laugh, but it wasn't going to cut it. So I was begging for sleep that whole third night, but there was just nowhere safe to sleep. It was wet, it was cold, and there was just nowhere to get out of the elements. So Cyril had promised me, that we could sleep when we got to Mintaro. And so when I saw that bench, it was just really inviting. But I think that's the other thing though, like with these kinds of events, if you try to sleep, you usually can't. But when you get to that point of exhaustion, you'll sleep anyway. Like that bench was so comfortable. I've had friends go back there since and tell me it absolutely is not comfortable. It was just wire. It wasn't even like wood panels.
It's horizontal.
But that was the best sleep I've had in years, and I felt so rejuvenated afterwards, and it did last. And I think if I had to go on another night, you just wait until that sense of exhaustion hits you again, and then you do it again, and your body will sleep when it needs it. Yeah.
I saw that you ate cheese during your run. You mentioned how good a slab of cheese was an inspiration point, and the only distances I've done so far, I tend to avoid protein. I think I'm a bit afraid of getting an upset stomach or something like that. But obviously, when you're out that long, protein becomes essential. So I guess, what was your plan for carbs, protein, and how did all that go?
I'm very relaxed with my food these days. Yeah. I used to be very, very detailed, and I used to see a sports nutritionist and be very over the top with exactly how many calories I was taking in and not. And when I went to Tor Des Geants in Italy, they live off cheese. Like the races, it's cheese at every aid station.
Really?
And so I thought that was really interesting. And I was saying to a friend there who's from the region that I thought it was really unusual that every aid station had cheese, and she couldn't believe that we didn't all run with our own little packs of Parmesan, because it's just apparently so normal. But I learned a lot from that race, that you just need to have a bit of fun with these things. Like, I'm never going to win a race, so I'm not. No. If I get a bit of a gut ache, big deal. I'll walk it out for a bit and I'll come good. But like, your body will listen to your body. It will tell you what it needs. I've done enough of these things now to know kind of what it's going to ask for. When you're running for 4 days, you need some protein. Like, I need some protein. Sorry, you don't. Like, some people will be fine on gels and sugar and whatever else they need. But for me, like, that's 4 days that you're out moving. Like, I wouldn't go a normal day without having some protein. So why would I be doing that when I'm having huge amounts of muscle breakdown? And I find hard cheese. That's something I took away from Tor Des Geants. A bit of pecorino goes a long way. I tend to not overthink the food. I just, eat when I'm hungry. I tend to I keep the food going early, like, and I do aim for, at least 100 calories an hour. But other than that,
1 to 200.
Like, I tend to just have, like at the moment I really like those oat bars, so I'll just have one of those in my pack, and I'll just be taking a bite out of that like every sort of 20 minutes, but I don't set an alarm.
You couldn't anyway with your watch going.
I'm fairly food motivated, so I tend to not have, I'm not a problem, I'm not a person who has a problem with eating. I can keep it, going down, but I just have variety and whatever I feel like eating.
But also like nut bars, watermelon, bananas,
Yeah, the
Baked
watermelon was
beans?
great. Yeah, baked beans
Yeah.
was one night, which that was surprising. I hadn't tested that one out, but that was good.
I've done cold spaghetti out of a tin
yeah?
in a night run, and someone had put that in a drop bag, and it was the best.
Yeah. I reckon there's a point in these things, though, where you've just burnt so many calories that your body will just take anything. Because, like, I was chowing down really high calorie foods that I wouldn't eat in my normal life and haven't eaten in training, and they were fine. Like, they were just barely touching the surface. I was still able to run with, you know, a whole pasty in my stomach.
Yeah, the pasty's a finger bun.
Yeah. So,
because I found I tried using oat bars and seed bars in the second half of my 100 this year, and I found that I couldn't eat them. My body I was like, I don't want these. But I need the calories. Did you have any moments of your body not wanting food?
I kind of do that in the reverse. Like, I try and eat the more substantial stuff early because my stomach's working better. And then I save the high sugar stuff for when I don't want to eat. So I know when I was at Tor Des Geants, I ended up just filling my flasks with Coke because I couldn't actually stomach any food. It was really hot there, so I had that trick in the back of my mind if I did go off my food. But I think I was still able to eat like sweets. I was eating like biscuits and lollies and heaps of ginger beer, lots of ginger beer and Coke, and that's disgusting. You don't want to be doing that for 4 days. But if you save it for that point when you can't stomach the other stuff, I think it's okay.
I mean, obviously, that's long enough that everything goes through the digestive system. So, how does your body go with that? We're talking toilet stops here.
Yeah.
Like, it's inevitable for that kind of distance.
Look, it's a pretty good race for that. There's a lot of trees, a lot of coverage. So, a lot of natural toilets. I know, like, after running through so many deserts where they're barren and you dread that moment when you need to go to the toilet. This was a good one for that. And, there's a lot of darkness as well. So, save those movements for when the sun goes down.
Oh, my goodness. Were they kind to you? I don't think everyone had a kind experience. So they had some little toilet disasters, I think.
Oh, no. Everything was my food and my toilet breaks. My body worked well for me in that regard.
So there's a lot of debate about whether electrolytes are necessary, and you're not a fan of electrolytes. So what was your approach to them in the 200 miler?
Yeah, I just I'm very relaxed about that too. I don't know. I feel like I know my body really well, and if it asks me for something, I'll give it to it. Yeah. But it's never asked me for electrolytes. Okay. So I did have Hydrolite just in case. I wasn't sure. You always doubt yourself. You have your view on things, but then when you're about to embark on something that big, you think, oh, am I right? Am I wrong? Especially something so controversial as electrolytes.
Yeah.
I did the exact same thing on some of the desert runs I've done where it's actually compulsory to take electrolytes with you, yet I'm not going to use them. So usually I do the gear check and then turf them. Yeah. But then part of me goes, don't turf them just in case.
Yeah.
So, I took some just in case. I think I probably had one here and there, just mostly because it was something different to water, like just for the taste of it. But
it seems one of those things where it's like a common understanding that that's what you do. You take electrolytes. But I know there's a very well-respected Australian coach, and I've heard his name pronounced differently. So it's either Andy DuBois or Andy DuBois. But he's an advocate that we don't need all that salt that we think we need.
Yeah.
I've written quite a few pieces about that. So
that's what I took Andy's advice on that desert run, where I was a bit concerned that I was being forced to take as mandatory gear something that I don't actually use in training. And Andy had actually commented on a Facebook thread that I started with some of his articles. And so that gave me the courage to not have it, to try not using electrolytes. Look, everybody's different though too. Like, I've never cramped in my life. So I drink to thirst, and everything has been okay for me. But I think I know a lot of runners have pretty horrible problems with cramping, and that might be a different issue.
I mean, like, I know that October last year I was put on an ECG, and basically the paramedics like, look, I know you're not having a heart attack, but we have to redirect you to this other hospital because it looks like you're having a heart attack.
Really?
And he goes, it'll be your electrolytes.
Oh.
And so my question, I don't know.
Was this during the run, sorry? Or?
Yeah, this was afterwards.
Oh.
And I don't know whether that means I didn't take on enough, whether, you know, I don't know, I sweat weirdly, or there was too much in some of the foods I was eating. So I never knew what it was and whether it was too much or enough. But yeah, that was his comment.
And do
so
you
now
use
I'm a
electrolytes
bit,
when you train?
well, now I do on longer runs. I just kind of have a steady, like a diluted. I don't make it to the packet because I find it too sweet. The infinite, and I don't want calories to come from liquid anyway. But that scared me. But then I really do believe what Andy wrote in his articles. It's very well researched, and there's a lot of things that we do just because traditionally that's what people thought was right, and there's so many things that have been proven wrong. And so now I'm confused. So I do like a half diluted dose of them, going, hope that's fine. Turned out fine this year, but
listen to Andy. Don't listen to me though.
No.
I'm so relaxed about my food and nutrition.
Yeah.
But I think that's. I went to, I was studying nutrition at uni for a little while when I thought I wanted a career change, and Dr. Sue Shepherd came to do a talk, who discovered the whole FODMAPs thing. And she was talking about how different organs are affected by stress. So, for some people, they'll get migraines when they're stressed. For some people, they'll have gastrointestinal issues. And so, like, there are a large number of people who actually have, legitimate food allergies or intolerances.
Yeah.
But even eating a purely, non-allergenic diet is not going to help them in every regard, because stress plays this extra factor. And if your digestive system happens to be the organ that's impacted by stress, then that's going to be the one for you. So for me, I find just having a really relaxed approach is actually way better for me than thinking about it too much. Yeah. So for me, my races go better when I'm really relaxed about how much food I'm taking in. Now, I'll always get enough calories, but where they're coming from, I don't really care. And that works for me because the downside is stress. Like, if I'm stressing about it, that's going to mess me up way more than eating something wrong.
One Snickers too many, or
And I think it goes the same for electrolytes a little bit too, because I know electrolytes can play havoc with your digestive system too. So it's about getting that right balance between, being hydrated and not giving yourself a guts ache. So for me, I just don't bother. But as I said, I don't ever get cramps. I think I drink a lot of water ahead of time, so I think I'm always pretty well hydrated, that my body can handle a race without going into meltdown mode.
Yeah. Well, that's really brilliant. Clothing is obviously important, and we've already talked about socks. Like my recent event, I found that the weather was like at this cusp where I put on another layer, I'm too hot. If I take that off, I'm too cold. I couldn't quite get it right. But you're going through 4 days of ever-changing weather of, was it hail to bright sunshine, really warm day. So, what clothing did you wear and plan for? And clothing would have been tricky.
I wore everything that I didn't plan for. So because I had a crew, which, was a luxury, I ended up filling the car with, emergency gear that I didn't think that I would need. So I had, I checked the weather ahead of time, and it said it was going to rain for a few hours on the first day, but then it was going to clear up. So I just had my light Salomon rain jacket, and, I ummed and erred whether to put it on at the beginning, but I've learned the hard way a number of times that you don't want to get wet, you don't want to get cold. So, I did stop and put it on, and I still kept thinking, it wasn't that cold the first day. It was wet, but it wasn't too cold, and I kept thinking, it's going to clear up, it'll be okay. But it didn't, and then it did get cold, and so I had all this sort of spare clothing that I'd put in the car that I've bought for like European races and things that I've never actually even used in Australia. Like, I have this really heavy Gore-Tex jacket that I packed in the car, thinking, like, if you get injured on a 200 miler or even a 100 miler and you have to walk it in, you're going to get cold pretty quickly. Yeah. So I have some layers of clothing that are much heavier than that I wouldn't normally run in, but therefore that, I'm not going to quit. I'm just, if I have to walk it in, I'll walk it in. I was in that Gore-Tex jacket on the first night and ran with it pretty much through like the next day and the next night.
Wow.
So yeah, and then I only packed a few pairs of gloves. Now that was an error, and I didn't put them on straight away too because I just didn't think it was going to be that cold in Adelaide.
I've learned that the hard way. The split second I think I might need gloves, put them on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So lots of layers. So I had some gloves but didn't have enough and didn't pack my waterproof gloves, and because there's lots of styles you've got to cross over, so you're constantly grabbing the cold, wet poles. So waterproof gloves would have been great. But in terms of everything else, just lots of layers. And I packed a fair few fleeces. I don't know why I didn't think I was going to actually use them, but I used everything. So I didn't end up changing my shirt and bra very often. I changed them once. And that was just because it was too cold. So I didn't want to take layers off. I was just adding layers on.
Yeah.
But then come the last day or day and a bit, the sun came out and it actually got really hot, and I actually ended up having to call for help to get my shorts and a hat brought out because it got hot very, very quickly, and that was on the bit that's on the Riesling Trail, and went
that's
from
really exposed.
So went from guarding against the cold and the rain to very quickly having to guard against the heat. So I used everything basically. Wow. I'm realizing as I'm recapping this, like any gear for any season that you have lying around, if you're planning on doing this race, pack it in a plastic tub and stick it in your crew car. Yeah.
So was all those layers and having all that gear available how you handled like when your body stopped being able to regulate your temperature properly?
Yeah, I think I felt the cold pretty quickly. Like the first day I was okay, but then come that night, I got cold quickly. So wearing that Gortex jacket rather than relying on the light waterproof really came in handy, and I think that really helped. The second day, because I was expecting the wet weather to clear up, and so I did start the day in my fleece thinking that I would hand it over to someone at the first checkpoint, but I took it off for about 6 minutes and then put it back on, that Gore-Tex back on, and it stayed on. So I think my advice is always put those layers on early, and if the weather is actually wet and cold but you're not feeling it, still put them on. Like it's almost like that mum voice in your head. You don't want to put it on, you don't feel cold, but by the time you feel cold it's too late.
Yes it is.
Oh, hand warmers, actually. I had a whole bunch of hand warmers that I've got from Paul Ashton gives them out for his Alpine Challenge events as mandatory gear. I've never used them. I just had them sitting in this plastic tub. I used all of them in this race. Like they were just there lying around because I'd forgotten to do anything with them. Oh, they came in handy because, my hands were really cold.
My friend left some for me as a present at the end of Hyson. And I'd never used them before.
Oh,
they take a little while, but then, oh my goodness,
they're so good.
Yeah.
And then you can just put them anywhere. Like you can stick them in your socks. Or
that's cool. Did you get any chafing at all?
No, I didn't actually. And I think it's because it was just so cold. I barely sweat the first few days. And I had really good quality gear on that didn't chafe or rub against my skin. So I have a whole bunch of Arc'teryx stuff. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that stuff it's so expensive, but it's really amazing quality, and it doesn't get a stink or get like it was damp the whole time, but I ran in the same shirt the whole time. So no chafing. And then even in the heat, I think my gear really served me well. Yeah.
And you said you changed shoes halfway to a size half or a size up. Yeah. Yeah, as your feet expand. What gear did you carry with you to have on hand? So you obviously had stuff in your car. But what did you take with you? I'm a stickler for mandatory gear. Yeah. People will know in the Facebook world that I'm a mandatory gear enthusiast. So I carried what I would expect a race director to have as minimum mandatory gear at all times. And I actually ended up having to use most of it. So I had a space blanket with me at all times. I had a snake bite bandage with me at all times. I had emergency food with me in case I got lost. I had a head torch with me at all times, spare batteries.
My crew ended up taking that off me on, I think it was like the third day, because maybe it was even the fourth day, because we knew I was going to finish in daylight, but I had anxiety over it. I was still worried, and I had someone running with me who had a torch, but the fact I didn't have that with me caused me concern. I had a thermal with me at all times, a buff with me at all times, and I had my Salomon waterproof jacket, the light one, with me if I wasn't wearing one. I had that in my pack at all times. And I carried quite a bit of water. I think probably 2.5 to 3 litres was the most I'd carry, but I always had at least 1 to 2 litres with me, just because that's the real risk on that trail, really, is that there aren't water points. So, you're relying on crew, and I had great people who are out there helping me, but, things can happen. It's not their race, it's my race.
Find a stop.
So you have to be sufficient. You have to be, able to look after yourself. So I always carried a little bit extra in that regard.
Yeah. So you don't be derailed because someone got a flat tire.
Yeah. That's right.
And did you use poles at all?
I carried poles with me because I've got those black diamond, really lightweight poles. So I just had them in the pack. I think I didn't end up using them I started using them maybe the first night, maybe. I ran the first day without them. And then they were just really, they were helpful. Some of the, coming out of Truro is quite hilly. Yeah. And so I did need them then. But then the rest of it was more just like it kept me vertical. Yeah. I actually used them to have a little nap a standing nap from time to time. It's funny. They're not really required on that kind of a course, but I think anything longer than 100 miles often they can just be beneficial from a fatigue management point of view.
Yeah. And I think you've pretty much talked about this, but safety-wise, like in case something went wrong, like you had enough liquid and you had all the mandatory gear.
Oh, I also had a spot tracker.
Oh, right, yeah. So I was saying, because your watch wasn't working. And but you had that.
Yeah, because there's just so much of that course that you're not going to have. Well, I actually thought the phone reception was better than I thought it was going to be, but there are massive sections where there is no phone reception. I was thinking that there was going to be far more snakes than there actually was, and I was just, there's massive wombat holes, burrows through there too. Like it'd just be so easy to
I get
injure
worried
yourself.
Going through farm fields. I just think about all the divots from hooves, particularly if the grass has grown a bit and you can't see them.
Yes.
You just roll an ankle.
That's exactly what half this, it's dirt roads and that. So I just felt like, given it wasn't a race, given it was self-supported, I went on the, was overly cautious, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah. Kind of looking at this question I have here about how important was it to you mentally doing the event properly and completely. I think I remember reading your blog about it, that with the Truro incident, like going along the road was just too dangerous, so you got driven back to the point where you got lost. So you hadn't actually cheated in inverted commas, like you're just getting back to where you needed to be, but that devastated you a bit. But then right at the end, like you went past the sign to touch the actual end of the trail. So everyone's saying, stop here, but no, all the way there. So did you have that feeling like I must do this properly and completely? And
I was very rigid, and I can be a real perfectionist at times to the point that I'll just beat myself up about it. And so when I did my detailed race plan, the first night I was planning on staying at the Eden Caravan Park. I was going to camp there, and that's about 3K off the course. So I was going to get picked up there and driven there, and then thought about it the night before the race and thought, I can't do that because that's getting in a vehicle. I need to be on my feet for the entire duration of the run. So I ran to that caravan park and back. And so I had it in my head I wasn't getting in a car for anything other than a nap.
Which is funny, because I think in a lot of like professionals do like drop a coin or some marker on that. And depending on the event, like if there is nowhere safe to sleep, they do just get taken to a sleep station and then back.
It's ridiculous why I thought that. But in my head, I thought that was how it was going to have to be. So, then when I got lost in Truro, I didn't follow, because of where I got driven to. I actually got driven, so I came through the town, and then because I was following the All Trails map, which is slightly different to the actual Lavender Federation trail map. So I think you're supposed to stay on the course rather than go into town. But the way I went meant that I couldn't keep going those extra few Ks. I think it was 3 or 4 Ks. So I had to be driven that far along. But I'd run those extra Ks going to Eton. Yeah. And then I'd also run those extra Ks getting lost going into Truro. But in my head, it was absolutely devastating that I was going to be driven those few Ks. And I really, that was partly why I had my little meltdown. Yeah. But I'm really glad I picked myself up and kept moving, because once I finished, I realised that didn't matter at all.
It didn't matter. And as you said, you've done those Ks and a bit more.
It's probably a metaphor for life. It's really easy to get hung up on the little details that don't go perfectly when they actually don't matter.
No. That's funny. So when you did finish, you were telling the story of your nana, who would always ask, did you make any new friends today, every time you went for a run? So what was your experience with friends in the 200 miler, like those supporting you and people you met along the way?
It was pretty magical. It was, it's a bit of an inside joke that's what my nana would ask me, even as a 30-something-year-old. And Mignon, who met me at Minato, asked me that question, 21K into the race, which stuck with me through the whole run. And, I think, I said before, I'm pretty uncomfortable having crew. Like it's a huge thing you're asking of people. And pacers and anyone you're asking to help, because it was my adventure. Why on earth would they care about what I'm doing? But I just couldn't be more grateful, and I feel like they wanted to be there. I hope they did. I hope they got something out of it. But I feel like my friendships with those people are so much richer now. Like they did something for me that was so special, so meaningful. So in terms of my friends I already had, they're so much richer on a deeper level. But, meeting some of the other competitors was absolutely awesome. So Sarah, we ran together for a large part of the first day and the first night. And she's the most humble human being and so badass. Like, she's done some crazy stuff. She fast-packed the whole course a few weeks earlier. And so running with her was great, because I got to switch the mind off for a little bit because she knew the course really well. But she was an amazing human being, and I felt like those hours we spent together were such a privilege. And then Tamas, who is the funniest runner I've met. Like, what a privilege that was to meet someone like him. And then, to share a little bit of the trail time with Tim and hear about his purpose and his passion. Really, it's a small field, but what was really interesting is the first day we all were kind of running together for a large part of the day. Like, no one was really too far ahead.
Tim said that wasn't like a deliberate thing.
No.
You just happened to be pacing it the same.
I don't know any race where all the competitors are the same pace, but maybe it's something that attracts the 200-mile participant. But, Tamas did get lost, so we lost him. But there was a large part of the evening on day one where Tim, Sarah and I were running together, and that was really beautiful. It was a real privilege to spend that time with those people. But everybody else who came out to help as well, like Michelle, my gosh, what a giver. Like I met Michelle at a 100-mile race a few years ago, but it was a different experience getting to know her and seeing just how generous and kind she is. And then everybody who's connected to the event in some way. It's I could talk all day about the new friends I've made. So yes, Nana, I did make some new friends.
That's brilliant. Would you recommend, this is a listener question, spacing out huge adventures like this? Or do you think maybe, let's pretend COVID doesn't exist, doing a few each year to keep the momentum up and to keep your love for the sport up? So what's better?
I was thinking about this issue this morning, actually, while I was out running, and I was going to run 10K today, and I thought I didn't feel like it, so I ran 5, and I felt that was enough, given I'd run 200 miles this year. And I was thinking about someone like Courtney Dalwater, who backs up her events one after the other, and the difference between someone who's an elite and whose body clearly copes much better, you know, it can sustain that kind of pressure versus a mid to backpacker.
Yeah.
And for me, like, it took a lot out of my body. Like, I'm tired. And look, when I first started running ultras, there was one month where I ran 5 ultras in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And so your body can do it, but whether it wants to do it, and like, it depends on your purpose. Like, everyone runs for a different reason. If you just want to go nuts and see what you're capable of and throw it all up, you know, in the ring, go for it. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't do that. I don't really think there are any rules with ultras. Like, do what you want. Yeah. But for me, I lost my mojo with running for a little bit. I did a lot. I had some big years, and then I sort of backed it off a bit, and I've rekindled it through COVID. I've really learnt what running means to me. And I want to be running when I'm old and grey. Yeah. And so for me, it's about sustaining that passion. Yeah. The body can sustain it. It's fine. Like, my body's resilient. I can put it through whatever I need to. But the love, the passion, like, I get so much more out of it than just a workout. Yeah. And I don't ever want to lose that. So for me, you know, I run when it's kind of like the food and the nutrition and the electrolytes issue. If I'm feeling it, I go for it, and if I'm not, I don't. And right now, you know, there's some big races that excite me, but I feel like I'm not quite ready to commit to that yet. For me, and sometimes, like, we don't ever stop and smell the roses anymore. And I know, like, with these, you know, like these Triple Crowns and things, like, they're great. Like, if you can do that, amazing. But for me, I almost felt like by signing up to another one, it diminished the achievement of and you know, if you're capable of running 200 miles in a year, that's freaking amazing. Yeah. But for me, running one was a huge achievement, and I don't want to diminish that by feeling like I have to go and sign up to something else straight away. Like, I'm pretty happy to sit back and you know, cherish the memories and the achievement of that first event before I move on to the next one.
Yeah, sounds good. You have been doing some volunteering. So at Hyson, since then you were crewing and pacing. Who was it? Kirsten Mapleston in her first Coast to Cozzy. Yeah. So what's it been like being on the other side, watching people toughing out their own adventures?
It's so fun. I think that's probably you know, don't race every weekend. Mix it up with some volunteering. You still get to be part of the fun. You're not missing out on anything. No. And you're not smashing your body and your soul. Like, you know, and the thing is, I felt incredibly guilty having a crew and asking people to give me a week of their time. But if I'm prepared to give a week of my time, then I've got nothing to feel guilty about. Yeah. You know, it's all give and take. And, you know, I feel like people are so kind and generous to me in this sport that I wanted to repay that. So I absolutely loved, I love volunteering at Hyson to start with, because I'm originally from South Australia, but I've lived in Victoria for 10 years. So I wasn't a runner when I lived here. So I'm really interested in, you know, learning about South Australian runners, cultures, events. And I know it's the first year that Sean's taken over, but it's an iconic South Australian event. And it was really fun to be a part of. I got to be mandatory gear police, which, you know, always makes me happy. But, you know, it's putting people's safety first. That's what I'm doing. Yeah. And then, you know, crewing and pacing Kirsten was such a privilege. I think Kirsten likes to credit me way more than I deserve. I think we both really started our running careers around the same time, and we've been finding our way, and we're both big red runners and have then moved into the world of, you know, some far crazier things since then. And so it was such a privilege to see her attack something so ambitious and give it, you know, her absolute best, and to see the grit and tenacity that she has. I actually found it really inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. You have set up a home gym.
Yes.
Getting all your gear up 2 flights of stairs. So what's your 2021 plans for strength work?
Just to have fun with it again. So, you know, these are the things I've learned as I'm getting older is, you know, I am a perfectionist at heart, and I do love a routine. I love a training plan. I love to document everything. But sometimes, you know, that takes the fun out of it. And so there are a few years where I was really pushing with CrossFit and, competing with CrossFit, and started to actually feel like maybe I was too old to train that hard. And then I went to my osteo, who told me that was the most ridiculous thing he'd heard, and that he wouldn't listen to that excuse till I was 60 at least.
Awesome.
So, but what I realised, it's another thing of putting too many pressures on yourself. So, have a bit of fun with it. Like, I think I've got a really good base, so I can have fun with it. But just strike that balance between running when it gives me joy. But, if you wake up one day and you don't feel like running, don't run. Hit the gym. I bought a stand-up paddleboard. Yesterday morning I didn't feel like going for a run, so I went and paddleboarded around West Lakes. There's
brilliant.
plenty of awesome things you can do for your body and your mind without making running a chore.
Yeah, definitely. Someone has asked, another listener question, would you ever do it again, about your 200 miler?
I don't know. I think it's a privilege to be able to run those kinds of things. It's an absolute privilege and luxury to go and run 200 miles for fun. And I think I need to pay that forward. So, I'm more than happy to crew, pace, provide advice to anyone else who wants to run that particular 200 miler. I will volunteer. I will be, cheering on the sidelines. But I think I've had my cake. I think it's time to let others. I'll pick other 200 milers. Sean's got some pretty exciting things happening, I think, in the 200 mile space. But I think I've ticked that one off.
Okay. So do you have anything that you'd like to do in 2021 if it goes ahead?
That's hard, because the one thing that's still in the back of my mind is Tor Des Geants. Like, that's my thing. I want to go back. But I don't think that travel is going to be happening in 2021. So I'm thinking of my goals around how do I make sure that when we're allowed to travel again, how do I tick that one off? So I think one thing that's still in my unfinished business bucket is Alpine Challenge 100 miler. I've never actually finished the miler. So, and maybe it's a little bit sometimes, if you don't have to travel overseas for an event, sometimes you kind of maybe don't try as hard. Whereas now these events are so precious, because we just had a year where they were taken away from us. So I feel like it would be, it's still fairly quickly, so it's fairly soon, so I'd need to pull my finger out and start training properly if I'm going to do that. But so far that's the main thing that excites me.
Alpine Challenge. Well, cool. That's all the questions I have, and the listener questions as well. I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's definitely something where you hear about this and go, oh my, what is that like? What is that experience? It doesn't even compute. To go for 4 days straight, essentially, pretty close to. So congrats on finally,
Thank you.
You had that one that was like little bugbear. I can do this, and you've shown yourself that you can. And sounds like you had an amazing experience. I'll put links to everything that we've mentioned in the show notes. So thank you very much, Tash, for your time, and good luck in your future adventures.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a wrap from me in 2020. Thank you for listening and for the positive feedback I've received. If you have any suggestions for interviewees or topics in 2021, hit me up with ideas on Tales From The Midpack on Facebook. And if you're happy to give me a rating and or a review on the platform you listen with, that would really help this be more visible to others when they're searching for running podcasts to listen to on those long runs. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and see you next year.